This is a lecture that I gave in February of 2023. So some of the names and positions of people, the presidential line of succession, have changed since then. However, since this is talking about current events and the cabinet of the president is likely to change across the next year and a half, I am just going to keep with the names I used in February. So hello, class. Do you know this man could have become president last night? I don't expect anyone to recognize him. This is the Secretary of Labor and former mayor of Boston, Marty Walsh. He was the designated survivor for a big event that happened last night, which was 2023 State of the Union. And the State of the Union is where the president goes and gives a speech to a joint session of Congress. And behind him is usually the president, the vice president, and the Speaker of the House. Usually, it's basically everyone in Congress, and usually even some members of the Supreme Court. So, the reason we have a designated survivor is if some catastrophic event happened. Okay, boom, like drone strike on the Capitol building, kill everyone there. There would be a continuity of government. Marty Walsh and a secure location would become president of the United States. So you can see why it's a highly protected event. So we are going to go through what the presidential line of succession is as of February 2023 and how it's changed across time, why it's important, and some of the close calls that we've gotten to having nobody there to take over. So, in the Constitution, Article 2, Section 1, Clause 6. In the case of the removal of the president from office, or his death, resignation, or inability to discharge the powers and duties of said office, the same shall devolve on the vice president, and the Congress may by law provided for the case of removal, death, resignation, or inability, both the president and vice president, declaring what officer shall then act as president, and such officer shall act accordingly until the disability be removed or the president shall be elected. So basically what they're saying here is the vice president succeeds the president. This is in the Constitution. This cannot be changed without amendment. However, if you want to add who goes after that, have at it, Congress. And they have. So at the moment, the president of the United States is Joe Biden. And the vice president of the United States is Kamala Harris, the first woman to have this role. So if anything happened to Joe Biden, Kamala Harris becomes president. Then it goes to members of Congress. So if something happened to both the president and the vice president, it would then go to the Speaker of the House, which is currently a Republican called Kevin McCarthy. The Republicans have a slim majority in the House of Representatives, but so therefore there's a Republican speaker. Then it goes to the Senate, where they have the leader of the Senate, Senate pro tempore, and that is Patty Murray. So it's typically the oldest and most senior senator from the majority party. And the Democrats have a slim majority in the Senate. However, their most senior senator is 90, so they got someone slightly younger. Then it goes back to the cabinet. And these are done by the order in which the cabinet, these positions were created. So you would have then Anthony Blinken, the Secretary of State, because the State Department was the first department created, followed by Janet Yellen and the Secretary of Treasury. Lloyd Austin, Secretary of Defense, and Merrick Garland, the Attorney General. Deb Haaland, Secretary of Interior, Tom Vilsack, Secretary of Agriculture. We'll have the Secretary of Commerce, followed by the Secretary of Labor. Secretary of Health and Human Services, Secretary of Housing and Urban Development, Marcia Fudge, the Secretary of Transportation. Again, these are just in the order in which they were created. But then we have a hiccup. Jennifer Granholm, she's Secretary of Energy. She used to be the governor of Michigan, but she was born in Canada. And you must have met all the qualifications to be president, to be in the line of succession. So, in the event of a catastrophe, she skipped over. Goes to Secretary of Education, Secretary of Veterans Affairs, and then the last in line of succession is the Secretary of Homeland Security, simply because Homeland Security was the last office created. However, Alejandro Mayorkas was not born in the United States, so he's not a citizen by birth. Therefore, he would be skipped over. So this line of succession, that's how it currently is. It's changed several different times. We have the President's Succession Act of 1792. And so this was what the Constitution says. Okay, Vice President is first in line, but afterwards, Congress, you decide. So Congress decided. So they had it where something happened to the President and Vice President, it'd be the head of the Senate, the President pro temp. Then followed by the Speaker of the House. It also designated that the successor would only be acting president and that a new presidential election will be held in November of that year. So that brings up a ton of intriguing possibilities that never came into force. It's replaced in 1886 with the different Presidential Succession Act. And it removed the elected members from office, from the line of succession. And it made the succession now with the presidential cabinet in order the departments were created. So since the State Department was created first, it meant the Secretary of State would succeed the Vice President. And there are people like confused about this today that think that the Secretary of State is after the Vice President. And that's because we've had these multiple acts. The one that we still do today is the Presidential Succession Act of 1947, and it is a kind of compromise of these acts. So they bring back the elected official part. But this time, the Speaker of the House got put first, followed by the head of the Senate. And then it's the line of succession continues under the members of the presidential cabinet in the orders they were created. And since Homeland Security was last created, it goes last. And this was one that was in the idea of the nuclear bombs existed by this point. Okay, so the need for a continuity of government and for the ability that there could be some sort of an event that took out so many members became much more likely. And we have had a bunch of presidents leave office early. So most of them are by death. William Henry Harrison died of pneumonia. Zachary Taylor died of food poisoning. Abraham Lincoln was assassinated by John Wilkes Booth. James Garfield was assassinated by Charles Guiteau. William McKinley was assassinated by an anarchist. Warren G. Harding died of a heart attack. Franklin D. Roosevelt died of a stroke. And John F. Kennedy was assassinated by Lee Harvey Oswald. We also had Richard Nixon, who resigned following the Watergate scandal. So we've had all these different events, 9 different times, in which the president has left office early and the vice president has come into this. And for most of U.S. history, there was no way to replace the vice president besides a new presidential election. So we had these extended vice presidential vacancies. So this is just pulled up from Wikipedia. But just some examples. So George Clinton dies in the end of James Madison's first term. Not a big deal, though, because there's an election just around the corner. which Jerry gets brought in, dies midway through Madison's term. Okay, John C. Calhoun, he leaves ahead of right after a presidential election, not a big deal. And the other things like John Tyler became president, Millard Fillmore became president. And for like John Tyler, it's over 3 years. William Rufus King dies, he's vice president. He only lives like a month into it. Giant gap. After Lincoln's assassinated, President Johnson doesn't have a vice president. So this is a big problem. Okay, that is occurring, especially if you consider someone like Lyndon Johnson, for over a year, doesn't have a vice president. JFK was just assassinated. So what's going to happen there is we're going to get the 25th Amendment. This is going to fix this problem. So what the 25th Amendment does is makes it crystal clear that the vice president becomes full president in the case of death or removal. It allows for the nomination of a new vice president if approved by the majority of both houses of Congress. It also allows the president to temporarily transfer powers to the presidency to the vice presidency. So this has happened several times. It's usually due to colonoscopies, where the president is being put under. So they write a letter saying, well, I'm under, the vice president is acting president. Okay, so there were a couple of times that Dick Cheney was acting president. Kamala Harris has been acting president. Okay, no one notices. It also allows the vice president, with the support of the majority of cabinet, to remove the president from office in the case of disability. And it gives a process for the president to appeal to Congress. This has to do with if the president is basically a vegetable. They're alive, but there's nothing there. What to do in that situation. Now, the last bit I want to talk about is some almost presidents and some times where the line of succession was not good enough. And we were pretty close to catastrophe of having no one to run the government. And there's 3 times that there was no one to take over. So some of these aren't very long, but July 9th through July 11th of 1850. So President Zachary Taylor dies on July 9th. So Vice President Millard Fillmore becomes president. However, the Senate had not convened yet to elect a leader. Now the House had met, but they elected a Speaker of the House that was under 35, therefore ineligible to become president. I do think it is likely that if Millard Fillmore had dropped dead the day after Zachary Taylor, they probably would have had a very temporary Speaker of the House become president, even though he was under 35, just as a matter of desperation. September 19th to October 10th of 1881. So, September 19th, President James Garfield dies. So Vice President Chester Arthur becomes president. However, there's no head of the Senate, there's no Speaker of the House, because Congress had not convened this year. They thought it was pointless because Garfield was dying a slow 2-month death. Then, November 25th to December 7th, 1885, Vice President Thomas Hendrick dies. There's no way to replace vice presidents at this time. And Congress did not got in session in 1885, so there were no leaders of the Senate or House. So if the president had died, there would have been no one to take over. And then 3 almost presidents. People you probably haven't heard of. Lafayette Foster. He was the head of the Senate in 1865. And Lincoln gets assassinated. But it was part of a larger plot, where they were supposed to also assassinate the Secretary of War and the Vice President. And the Vice President, that assassination attempt doesn't go through. But if it had been successful like Lincoln's, it would have meant that Lafayette Foster would have become president. Then, soon after this, Andrew Johnson, now president. He has no vice president. He gets in trouble with Congress. He gets impeached. It goes to the Senate for a vote. And Johnson survives conviction on his impeachment charge and removal by one vote. And if he had been removed, one more person voted. The head of the Senate at the time, Benjamin Wade, known as Bluff, would have become President Wade. And then most recently, Carl Albert. He was the Speaker of the House, where Richard Nixon is president. Okay, Nixon resigns. Ford goes from being vice president to president. And so, if something had happened to Ford, the Speaker of the House would become the next president. Now, Carl Albert has talked about this actually in the past, what he would have done, because he was a Democrat and the presidents were Republicans. So if something happened to Ford, he would have said, he would have, as president, convene Congress, ask Congress to elect someone as vice president. That's a Republican. Then he would have stepped down. And then that vice president would have become president, and they would have asked Congress, hey, can you get me a vice president? And Carl Albert would have gone back to being Speaker of the House. He did not want the line of succession to change the political makeup of who's in office. And right now, there's only one way that can happen. The entire line of succession right now are either Democrats or independents, except for the Speaker of the House, Kevin McCarthy. So that would be a big difference if he became president. It would change the party in power. All right, so that was my lecture from February 2023 about the presidential line of succession.